Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there, welcome everybody. I am so excited to have my guest today, Dr. Karen Wilson, talk about assessment and just some other resources that are available for parents. So in child and adolescent psychotherapy, one of the things that we are always running into are how do we get more support to parents who have neurodiverse children? Mm-hmm. And we know that parents need a lot of support anyway. Parenting is hard. It's not for the faint of heart is what I would say. And then if you have a child who is not doing well in school and they're struggling and they've got some other challenges and it doesn't make sense and the traditional parenting strategies do not work when you have a neurodiverse child, of which I am well aware because I have two neurodiverse children who are now grown adults. So I am well acquainted with that. So I thought how awesome if Karen would come on and talk to us about her program and be a really good resource for child and adolescent therapists so that you can pass the information on to your clients, to the parents of your clients. So, Karen, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Child Nexus?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Cathi. I'm so happy to be here. So I am a pediatric neuropsychologist. I've been working in the field for over 20 years. It feels hard to say that. And I evaluate kids who struggle with a host of learning, social, emotional, and other difficulties. And usually when parents bring their kids to me or one of my colleagues, it's because their kids have been struggling at home or at school, and nobody seems to know why. They may suspect some things, but they're not sure. And they really want to get some support around identifying why their child is struggling so that they have a plan in terms of how to support them. So I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist, and I'm also the founder of Child Nexus, which is a digital platform that really seeks to connect parents with resources and support so that they can better help their kids at home, advocate for their kids at school, and to help their kids thrive.
That is so awesome. So you say pediatric neuropsychologist, and my inner nerd inside of me goes, so yeah, and that is one of them. That I do want to talk a little bit about, which is what's the difference? This gets asked all the time. What's the difference between psychological testing and neuropsychological testing? And the other question I get asked all the time, and I find this happens a lot, and I get it and I understand it. And a thorough assessment is much better than just filling out one Connors.
Yes.
There's so much more involved than just doing the BASC. I don't even know if they do that one anymore, but backward.
They do. Yeah. BASC 3, third version.
Yep. So, just the self, the one you answer yourself, and you don't know. It's better than nothing. I think it does. I think it kind of helps get some information, but in my mind, it does not replace a very thorough assessment that's going to give you so much more information. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Resources available that you can provide to the parents of your clients that's available to give them support. Let me check in and see who's here. I would love to see who's here today. if you're watching live, go ahead and post your name in the comments, where you're from, what population you work with, what questions do you have for today about testing, and what is formal assessment, and what are some important things to keep in mind? How do you know if you need to refer? Like, what kinds of questions do you have? If you're watching on the replay, welcome. I would still love to know who's here. Post your name in the comments, and let's get started. So first question I have, and this one comes up a lot, I think, because I do a lot of consultation now. I would say at this stage, 30 years into child and adolescent mental health, and then 5 years as a special ed teacher in my early days. One of the things that I find comes up a lot with play therapists, and we talk about this sometimes when I'm doing consulting, especially in my Play Therapy Academy program, is why? What's testing going to help out? Why would I feel so bad asking parents to go pay all that money? And in my mind, it's because I've come to understand the full benefit of it. I think it's definitely a good thing to do if parents have the resources. But how can formal assessment improve play therapy effectiveness? As play therapists, what's the benefit of having parents go and get that?
Right. Absolutely. That's a great question. I think that is a question that many clinicians and therapists ask, because, the short answer is because you want to know what are the underlying issues that a child is struggling with. Because kids, for example, can have big tantrums, emotional dysregulation for a number of different reasons. And unless you know what are the contributing factors to that emotional dysregulation, you really don't know what to work on, or even if you're the appropriate person to be addressing the issue. And for example, they have some kids who have problems with expressive and receptive language. They say something and their parents say, "Did you say this?" And they're like, "No." And then they have a big tantrum because they're not understood. And it's incredibly frustrating. And that frustration is tied to difficulties with understanding information and difficulties with expressing themselves. And that's a receptive and expressive language issue. And the underlying issue that needs to be addressed is language therapy or speech therapy. And so knowing that as a clinician, then well, that's what we have to address first. And we now see that the emotional dysregulation is just a symptom of a language-based disorder. Similarly, you can have a child who has ADHD that's been not identified, and they're having these big reactions because emotional dysregulation is a symptom of ADHD. It's one of many symptoms. There can also be inattention and hyperactivity and impulsivity. So kids say things they don't really want to say. They blurt things out. They interrupt. They can be moving around, and they can be emotionally dysregulated, not because of a depression or an anxiety or trauma, but because of ADHD. And obviously, knowing that, the intervention and the treatment for ADHD is going to be very different than the treatment for a child who's having emotional dysregulation behaviors connected to anxiety. And so knowing, again, the underlying issue that's causing the behavior the parents see, or the reason they may have brought their kids to you in the first place, is so helpful, because then we know, again, what the underlying issue is, and then we can address it appropriately.
I 100% agree. I say that all the time. And even one of the things I am such a huge proponent on, I see this all the time when I'm doing consulting with their play therapists, is because I get it, they want to help, so they go straight to the therapy sessions and skip over that assessment. Even I would call it an informal assessment, that biopsychosocial assessment, where we're asking a bunch of questions, because what's underneath the behavior. And when we're asking all of those questions, we can begin to get a sense of, there might be something more.
Right.
And if there's more, I really think it would be important to refer, because if you think it's anxiety, because it's manifesting as anxiety, but maybe underneath that anxiety, you're kind of looking and the parents are really supportive and they're attuned to their kids, their needs are getting met, they're in safe environments. So the level of anxiety doesn't make any sense
Right.
when you look at it that way, which is, and you're asking, and you know it doesn't make any sense because you have done that initial informal assessment, that biopsychosocial, you've asked your 9 zillion questions, and you're like, something not adding up. And so if it's, like you said, if it's an expressive language or disorder, or if it's sensory processing, right? Or something else, play therapy is not going to fix that.
Right.
So we're just putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm.
Right. I completely agree. And you say you see the same thing with learning differences, where kids refuse to go to school. They don't want to do their homework. They're ripping up their homework. And parents will see this as oppositional, as defiant behavior. And there could be an undiagnosed learning disorder or a learning difference in a bright kid who does not understand, why is this so easy for me to do? I'm the first one to put up my hand in class. I know all the answers, but ask me to write something down or ask me to read, and it's painfully obvious that it's a struggle that's disproportionate to other strengths.
And I think a lot of times also when we don't use that lens, so to speak, of really trying to, I call it going into super sleuth, my detective.
I love being in that mode.
It's so fascinating. Like, what's going on here? This doesn't make any sense. If we don't do that, then we're going to miss it. We're going to miss a whole big thing that's going on, and we're going to keep trying things that aren't working.
Right.
Unless I remember years, and this was years and years ago, I was working with this family. Parents were awesome. They were bringing their little son in. He was having meltdowns all the time. And these were parents. It's like, oh, I would like for you to adopt me. Will you be my? So it didn't fit, but the level of meltdown. And one time his mom was trying to help him with a spelling assignment. And she had this, I thought it was a brilliant idea. She took sticky notes and she put each word, his spelling. He had a hard time. Those were always a big meltdown, always a big meltdown, spelling tests. And he was a really bright kid. And so she put each word on a sticky note and put it on the door. And every time he got it right, he could pull the word down. One look at that door and lost his bananas, went into complete and utter meltdown mode, which made no sense. And eventually I had kind of convinced them to get the testing done. They got the testing done, and he did in fact have ADHD. And, you know, ADHD's got that executive function. So his mind,
it's overwhelmed.
It was totally overwhelmed. His executive function just went sideways, and he just lost it. And which is confusing for parents.
Right.
But then as a play therapist, in my mind, I'm going to feel like I'm failing, or I'm going to feel like the parents aren't doing something, and I could be blaming parents for not doing the right thing. Or I could be blaming the child. You know what I mean? Like, he can do all this blaming when in fact it doesn't have anything to do with that.
Absolutely. So not only do we not get the right intervention at the time that the child needs the intervention, but it can also delay getting the appropriate intervention while we're trying different things, trying to figure out what it is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I call it, it's like that throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping something sticks model. Not the most effective.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, let me check in. We have quite a few comments. So let me just kind of check in. We have Christian from Beaumont, Texas, who is a play therapist in training. Welcome. We also have Sabrina. I'm an art therapist. Wonder the first session, how you integrate assessment in the first sessions, talk therapy, balanced with creating the relationship and creative expression. I would say from a play therapy standpoint, and I would kind of throw in there as an expressive arts therapist in general, because play therapy is an expressive art therapy is expressive art. I would say that what I do, and then Karen, if you want to respond as well, from the therapy standpoint, that first appointment, which if you're in private practice or even an agency, you're billing insurance or you're coding your sessions, that's that 90791 session, diagnostic intake assessment. And that's your time. That's your time to do that full biopsychosocial, cultural, spiritual assessment. Ask all of the questions. And that is what you're going to use. You're going to formulate your case conceptualization from that. And then from there, you're formulating your treatment plan with them. So by the end of that session, I'm usually asking parents, what do you want to be better? Or if the child is old enough and they're in the session, what do you want to be better by coming? And how will you know that's better? This becomes the treatment plan. But to me, you take that first session, and then it's usually like the first 90 days, you're kind of getting to know your client better. You're checking out, is my case conceptualization on target? And like I was mentioning before, when you're asking all of those questions and things aren't adding up, like something seems off, in my mind, that's when I start talking about, hey, I think it's probably a good idea. We may want to think about getting more formal assessment. And then I start explaining what that means and the benefit to parents from there. And Karen, if you wanted to add.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so I only do assessments. I refer out to therapists like you all for the intervention. But when therapists recommend kiddos to us, it's because, again, something is not working in treatment, or a strategy that has typically worked for kiddos is not working for a particular child, or they see, based on their own evaluation, their own work, that there's something else going on. And so our assessment involves clinical interview with parents. We want to know everything from birth and delivery, pregnancy, early environment, developmental milestones, because what we're looking for are risk factors. What are some risk factors? That could be family history of anxiety, depression, learning disability, autism. It could be low birth weight, exposure to substances in utero, all of those things that put kids at risk for being wired differently. And that difference in wiring can contribute to social emotional differences, learning differences. And then as part of and that interview really guides the assessment process. So that's when we mentioned, Cathi, BASC or parent rating forms. That's part of our assessment process. We're going to, in addition to the clinical interview, because that gives us context, we're going to have those rating forms completed by parents and teachers, because we want to know what are parents seeing at home, and then what are the teachers seeing at school. Sometimes that's the same, sometimes it's very different. And those environments are very different. So that gives us information about how a child does in different environments. Are there environments where they do better? Do they feel more safe, more secure? And therefore they're not demonstrating some of these behaviors. And then we're doing formal testing. We're sitting down with kids, sometimes 2 to 4 to 6 sessions, evaluating problem-solving ability, cognitive functioning, attention, memory, social and emotional skills, language processing, all of the building blocks that they need to speak, connect, communicate, understand information, learn, and interact with others in their lives. And we take all that information together to really get a good picture of a child's strengths, all the things that they do very well, exceptionally well, sometimes even better than their peers, and the areas where they're struggling and where they need support. And that profile is what we share with parents, but also share with any practitioners or the child's team, including educators, to better understand that child, what helps them, what strengths they can draw on. And those strengths are so important because that is where we can help kids and families compensate for their areas of weakness, right? So if we know that they have a hard time expressing themselves verbally, but visually they're outstanding. Well, how can we integrate more hands-on demonstrations, hands-on activities, support this child while they're developing those language skills with the speech and language pathologist?
And just that collaboration, like what the information you get from the testing, because I'll always ask for a copy, and being able to collaborate. In the past, I've done some collaboration with the psychologist who completed the testing and gotten some information and figured out, so how can I use that in the play therapy process, but also supporting parents, encouraging them to follow through with the recommendations that were made, encouraging them to connect with any resources that have been provided, and kind of supporting parents to be able to use that information, do that advocacy, make those connections for their child. I think for parents, because we see them more frequently than if you're a clinical psychologist, that's a period of time. And then we're there the rest of the time. It's a really good way to build that kind of support network that was created with the testing. And then play therapists and therapists, I think, can continue to provide that support.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let me check in with a couple other. We have Rob. I'm a retired pediatric physical therapist and did the Play Therapy Project consultant education from Rick Solomon of the Play Project. Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of that. Rob says, I'm interested in the new science of the predictive brain and the implications it has on the behavior of the neurodifferent children. I'm living in the Netherlands. That sounds very interesting. Actually, I just got back from the Netherlands. He loves the Netherlands. We actually dream about moving to the Netherlands. I've not okay, now after we're done here, I'm going to have to go look that up. I've not heard of the predictive. Have you heard of that?
No, I have not heard of the predictive brain, but I do know that from parents, when they have a better understanding of their child's, again, learning profile, which is how their brain is organized, it just helps everyone, and that can be a learning difference. It can also be social emotional difficulties when they see that this is not disruptive behavior. This is anxiety. My kid is nervous and worried. And now I can support them in a meaningful and more empathetic way, right? And so I think understanding neuro differences is so important, because then you have a better understanding, again, of the behaviors that you're seeing. So when you send your child up and you say, and I say this often to parents, put on your pajamas, get a book, brush your teeth, and get into bed, and I'll meet you up there. And you go up and they're playing Lego. Well, it's not because they, they're, being disruptive and they're getting obstinate. It may be that they couldn't hold all of those instructions in their working memory, and they got distracted by the Lego that was more interesting to them at the time. And they forgot what it is that they were supposed to be doing. And then when you go up and then they're like, that's what I was supposed to be doing, right? It wasn't intentional. They weren't trying to get on your nerves or deliberately annoy you. It was tied to a neuro difference, which is, an underdeveloped attention system, underdeveloped working memory system, and a child who's easily distracted at the same time.
I'm having flashbacks. We had those. That situation. You have to learn to give them lists. Here's what you have to do. Just check them off when you do them.
Right.
Yeah, that's so true. And to me, that's one of the biggest benefits of having that more formal testing, is helping parents and therapists, helping parents understand their child's brain.
Yes.
And how their brain works. So then they can create those supports. Like, we adjusted in my home about, we set things up, or when they had to do their chores, there were the ways we had to do that to help be supportive and put things in place. It's just, if you don't know, though, you just, child is being a bad kid, so to speak. And then that has a whole host of other problems later on for them. So let me ask you another question, which is, so what are some things to consider about when it might be helpful to refer for a formal assessment? Do you have any tips for that, or things to consider?
Yeah, I think anytime a child has been struggling for a while and you've tried different things and nothing seems to work, things don't seem to be getting better, or they may even get worse. And you've tried, like we were saying at the beginning, typical strategies that work for parents, right? All the parenting books say to try A, B, and C, and A, B, and C absolutely don't work for your child.
Yeah.
And you're noticing that your child is struggling more than their peers in these areas, or more than their siblings did. That might be a time to maybe not jump into the assessment as the first thing, but talk to your child's pediatrician, talk to your child's teachers to get some insight in terms of what it is that they're seeing at school, right? Are they seeing the same thing? And collaborating on a plan. Sometimes the first step might be to seek out an assessment through the school, right? Where you're not incurring a huge cost, or check with your pediatrician to see, is this something that could be covered through my insurance? Maybe the speech and language therapy is the first step, and that's covered by your health insurance. And so again, it could be piecemeal, but it could be, we've been seeing this struggle for a long time. They were delayed in walking. They were delayed in talking. They had trouble learning to read. And it's a number of different things. We don't know exactly what it is. That might be a time where you want to do something more comprehensive, where you're looking at everything and you're getting a nice big profile of your child's learning style and a baseline in terms of where they are right now and where the intervention might need to be.
Yes. Okay. So little disclosure. If any of you have watched my live streams in the past, I have 2 dogs. And my husband has left for work. So the dogs are in my office. Like, you can see Luna's tail in the background. If you hear any moaning noises, I'm not doing anything weird in the background.
It's not me.
It's my dog, Luna. She likes to dig in the carpet and then roll around doing dog things. So sometimes you can hear her in the broadcast, but behind me, you'll see this little black and white tail moving around. She's kind of laying there now. It's like, oh, my mom's talking about me. Yeah. So just full disclosure, my dogs are in the room, and my dog Lily is underneath my feet right now, but she's sleeping. So she's not doing any moaning. So that's good. Well, let me go. We have another question. Oh, another comment. Rob says they didn't predict what you going to say at that moment, at that time. Okay. So that's an aspect of how the predictive brain is working and it sounds like a really interesting kind of a way of understanding the brain is what I'm guessing, the predictive brain, and looking at the neuroscience and understanding that, so you get a better sense of how things are working. So I'm definitely going to look that up later. That sounds really interesting. Thank you for mentioning it. Yeah. So, and another question that comes up a lot is, this one comes up a lot. How can play therapists make sense for us clinical psychologists trained? I remember back when I was in my bachelor's degree, this was back in the early 80s, in special ed, we had to take a whole semester of testing and assessments. That was 40 years ago. I don't remember much. I do remember there's a bunch of things to know about what each type of testing will do, and making sense of that. Especially, I'm always going to the IQ testing and looking at the processing speed, what those differences are. That's like probably the one thing I learned from 40 years ago. But just like a layman's understanding, what are some things that we can do to make sense of any of that formal testing? Any tips?
Yeah, without going back and rereading your textbooks, connecting with someone who does this, who does these assessments on a regular basis, and getting an overview, or listening to podcast episodes that clinicians do. I know we on the podcast have talked about assessments. what that process looks like, what is assessed with IQ testing and language testing and academic testing. That's always helpful. A great refresher to come from people who are doing it and are also taking continuing education to keep up with changes in assessment and what that looks like. So that's a great way, again, to connect with other clinicians who do assessments, consult with them. That's also a great way. And then also many of us are providing that information in talks that we give or in podcast episodes that we are collaborating with.
And you have a podcast, right?
I do.
Podcast.
It's Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. It's a podcast about neurodiversity, kids who think and learn differently, and ways that we can better understand how they learn, how they think, and how to support them.
And I think I put that link in the description. And what we can also do is after the broadcast ends, we can post a comment with a link in there as well. And if you're interested in the podcast, definitely check it out, because I think any of us working with children and adolescents, if we're doing the therapy part, I really do think it's important to be knowledgeable about this topic that we're talking about. And Karen's going to talk a little bit more about her online community, Child Nexus. If you're a child and adolescent therapist, I would definitely recommend checking it out and referring parents to check it out as well, because I think it's a really, really good resource that we can provide to parents so that they can learn more about that. And I would say get her here in the US, we have to have the releases of information. I would definitely say ask parents to sign consent for you to have a conversation with the clinical psychologist who completed the testing, just to kind of help understand and get some tips. It's been my experience, they're always willing to talk about and help and support any of the professionals working with the children and the parents to use some of the information that was obtained through the testing and put that in different areas for the child.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Always willing to talk to anyone who's involved in that child's life, right? That could be teachers, clinicians, educators. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then last question I had for today is, so for us on the therapy side of things, or even collateral professions, what are some things for us to keep in mind when we are referring a child for more formal assessments? Any tips about that?
Yeah, I think in terms of explaining it to parents and maybe even explaining it to kids and teens, that it's really, a process that's designed to really better understand them so that we can better support them, right? And I think that's the important message, that it's not about identifying and finding out if something is wrong, right? That's not the reason why we do it. We, again, if we think about it and approach it and explain it as a way to better understand your child, to identify those strengths, all those things that they're really good at, but then also identify those things that are getting in the way of them reaching their full potential and connecting with others. And so that's important to kind of keep in mind.
And one of the other things that I will often say to parents, and when I'm doing some consulting with play therapists, one of the things that I'll often say is, when you're talking to parents, really helping them to understand, that if we're going to be making some recommendations, especially if we're looking at medication, it would be much better to know what's going on, because if you don't need the medication because it's not ADHD, it's maybe something else, then you want to make sure that you're getting your child the help that's really going to make a difference for them, and not go down a path that's not going to get the help that your child needs. Yeah. Usually when I start putting it that way with parents, it starts to click a little bit more because that's their fear, right? Not getting their child the help their child needs. But also they have a lot of fears about what the testing process is. Like, what does that mean? How long does it take? Kids, you say testing, they think they're going to the doctor's office and getting a shot. So explaining no shots are involved. It's not going to hurt. Time consuming. It's worth it. And your clinical psychologist is going to know how to help you through that process. They're going to work with you. They're going to be supportive. Your child's not going to get overwhelmed. They're not going to have, well, I don't know. Do you ever have kids have meltdowns during the testing?
Oh, yes, that happens. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen.
Yeah, and they know how to handle it. It's not anything new, right? This part comes with the job.
It's data, right? Because then you know when they're melting down, it gives you information on what led to that meltdown and how they recover. All of that is part of the assessment process.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's so awesome. Well, that is it for today. Those were all the questions I had. I did want to spend some time and talk about your Child Nexus online community and how people can learn more about that. And we talked a little bit about your podcast. So can you talk a little bit about Child Nexus Academy or Child Nexus community online and how people can access that, what it is, what supports can it give?
Yes, absolutely. So, I started Child Nexus as a way to get parents information and resources because in my private practice, so many parents were coming in and saying, I wish I'd found you sooner. I wish I had known. The teacher said he was fine. They said she was just shy. They said he would grow out of it. And, I just felt that there should be resources available to parents in one place. And then I was getting calls from practitioners who were saying, I do play therapy, but who do you recommend for speech? Or I do speech therapy. Who do you recommend for play therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy or OT or, educational therapy or parent coaching? And so I realized that there wasn't one place where parents could go to get the information they need to help their kids. And all the information was fragmented. And I wanted to have one place where parents could connect with resources, information that they could trust that was rooted in science, evidence-based, and then also connect with professionals who could help your kids, whether that's an occupational therapist, speech and language pathologist, play therapist, psychologist, educational specialist, or a specialized school that serves kids who think and learn differently. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I created with Child Nexus. Again, it's a place where parents can go if their child is struggling with learning or social emotional issues. They can access content in the form of blogs. They can listen to our podcast. They can join our webinars, our learning groups. We've got on-demand mini courses that are going to be starting in about a month. And then they can connect with professionals and also professionals who want to connect with our community because it's interdisciplinary, can join as members. And that's one of the things that I was hearing from professionals is that, I'm going to all of my meetings, I'm interacting with other psychologists, but I don't have an opportunity to connect with other professionals who I need to interact with because my kids that I work with need more than just me. They need support in other ways, whether that's, again, occupational therapy, speech and language, an educational therapist. And so this is an interdisciplinary community of professionals who are supporting families in different ways.
That is so awesome. I remember, so I'm on the West Coast now when I spent most of my life on the East Coast. And when I was living in Virginia, I had a private group practice. And I would say that was one of the things I valued the most, having that community. I had connections with occupational therapists. I had connections with speech therapists. I had great connections with a couple of clinical psychologists. I had good connections with pediatricians. And so with a lot of the kids and even a vision specialist, which is kind of rare to be able to have access to a vision specialist and learning about that, a special ed attorney, and he would come and do free workshops for parents to understand. And that having that community of support for a lot of these kids, because we can only do so much in our individual disciplines. And for some of these kids, when they have that team of people, it's exhausting for parents. So part in the therapy, part of what we do is kind of give them support for all the things that they're doing and help them prioritize, because maybe therapy needs to stop for a little while they do their work with an occupational therapist and a speech therapist to address some of those things, because you get at the root of it, and then that might eliminate some of the mental health, emotional meltdowns and things like that. So, and you know what? I think if there's a silver lining out of the pandemic, I would say that we've all learned to connect more online and use those online resources and that community of support, so that especially like I live in Nevada now, it's a lot of rural areas. And so it's hard for parents to get access to support. And now that a lot more things are online, they have access to more resources. So I think that's awesome that you've created that amazing community that I think is just kind of invaluable. So if you are watching live or you're watching on the replay, check out the links. You can check out Child Nexus. You can check out the podcast and connect with Karen on Instagram and Facebook. You can check all of those out. If you are a child and adolescent therapist and you are interested in learning about play therapy, I do have a Play Therapy Academy. It's an online program to teach child and adolescent therapists how to use play therapy. We have twice a month consultation. We have online courses. So if you're interested in that, it's Play Therapy Academy. You can hop over to my website at rhplaytherapytraining.com. Click on the supervision page if you want to learn about Play Therapy Academy, or you can check out some of my courses as well. So thank you so much for being a guest and sharing your wealth of knowledge and information with
Thank you for having me, Cathi.
All righty. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.